Hi, welcome to Android session. Today we are going to discuss about one of the very important topic called intent in Android. Now, what exactly intent means and how do we use it? So, let us see that. And if you remember, so far we have done in this our project, we have completed the main activity. We have also done this. We are also done with the expense item activity. Today what we are going to do is that we are going to cover this area and we will see that how to develop a intent sample activity and test out some of the concept of intent. So, that is what is the idea today. So, let us start with our concept of intent. In this one, the topics what we are going to do is that first we will discuss about what is basic of intent, what are the usage of intent, what are explicit and implicit intent, what are the intent filters. So, these are the things we will discuss, and then we will create some sample activity for explaining the intent, and also we will launch some intent based actions as well based on this activity. Now, to take care of our traveler assistant project further, there are various things to do here. So, step 1 is create XML layout for new intent sample activity like this. This is the step number 1. Second one is create activity class for this layout. Third is create explicit intent in main screen activity to launch intent sample activity. Fourth is create implicit intent in intent sample activity. After that, we will do this, add the menu click event code, and then we will create intent filter in Android manifest.xml file, and then we will make some source code changes in main screen activity to launch their implicit intent. So, all of this we will do one by one, we will see that how to do it. But before that, let us understand what is the intent itself, what is the basic concept, why it is there. Okay. So, let us go there. Now, intent can be thought of as the messaging mechanism between various components in Android. So, it is basically a passive data structure. To put it basically, it is a passive data structure holding an abstract description of a target and an action to be performed. So, what it means is that it is an object with some data. So, what is intent? Intent is an object with some data with some action to be performed. Okay. Action to be performed. Now, here what happens is that what exactly it means that intent is an object which one activity can send to other activity, like this activity wants to send this object to this one, okay, or this activity wants to send an intent to this broadcast receiver, or this activity wants to start a service and he will send an intent object. So, basically all of these guys are communicating with each other using this intent object. Inside this intent object, they will obviously store some information and they will send it to each other. So, these components, activity, service, activity, other activity, broadcast receiver, all of these communicate using this guy called intent. Okay. So, intent is a central messaging mechanism. See what does it say? Messaging mechanism. And it is generally, it is basically an object with some data and an action to be performed. So, action to be performed means I want this service to start, I want this service to stop, I want this activity to be launched, okay. I want this broadcast receiver to do, I want this activity to open a web browser, I want this activity to show me the particular website, I want this activity to capture an image. So, that is what I mean by action to be performed. Okay. So, whenever you create an intent object, generally there will be some data and the name of the other component which it will receive and action to be performed on other activity, other component. Once we understand the basic concept of intent, let us understand what are the basic use cases of intent. Okay. So, what are the use cases? First is that it can start a new activity, it can start a new service, you can send a broadcast messages, you can send data to another activity or service. So, either you can just start, say start activity to start, but sometimes you want to send some data from one activity to another activity, and that time you can use intent as well, and we will see how do we pass the data as well. So, these are the various use cases in Android to take care of intent. Now, here is one small example that how does this start activity use case work. So, what we have is very simple, one activity A here, and here we have just put that created a intent, and that is pretty much what we are going to do. So, I have just create first a intent, this is the intent I will have created, and once I create this intent inside activity object A, I am putting a name here that this is the name of the activity B which I want to send to. Okay. So, after I create a intent object, I put the name of the second activity to whom I am going to send this intent object. So, while creating an intent object, you have to put the name of the second activity to whom you are going to send this intent, otherwise it becomes a implicit intent. So, it is explicit. So, first tell the name to where you are going to send this intent, and then you want to send some additional data as well. To send the additional data, the method is very simple, called put extra, and this is a key and value system. So, it works as a key value pair. There is nothing in much complex here, very simple key value. I can put name Rajesh, age 43, year 1947, country India, like that. So, it is a key value pair, and then I will say start activity. Now, the moment I say start activity, Android will take this intent object and will analyze, oh, I have to send it to activity B. So, he will go to start activity B, and he will start the activity there itself, and he will launch the activity for the user. When the activity is launched, inside that activity you can get this data which was sent retrieve back. How you retrieve back? Use the object bundle get intent.get extras, it will give you the bundle object, and from the bundle object there is a method called get string, and then you will get this value of get string, and here you have to put title, like this title you have to put here. Okay. So, once you put the title here as the key, you will get the value called hello Isaac Android. So, here you have to put in a quotes title. Now, how in general a intent object looks like? A intent object generally looks like very simple. It will have an activity name, it may have a bundle, it might be associated with some filter. So, that is generally an intent object looks like this. So, this is an intent object which looks like, and it goes from it is get fired from here and it reaches here. Okay. Another way to understand the same thing, in activity A I will create an object called intent B, and I will fire it. When I fire it, basically the control goes to the Android framework system. Android framework system takes the intent B and checks inside this intent B is there name of any component. If the name of the component is already mentioned, he will go to that component and will pass the intent to that. If not, then he will use the implicit intent concept to find out which component will receive this, and then pass the intent to that component. So, this is another way to just understand that how intent object flows from one component to another component, like one activity to other activity, one service to other service, and all those things. As we saw in the previous one, a intent object is a bundle of information also, and it has some standard things. First thing is called component name, which we have seen. This is the target component name, like it is like a target component. Sorry for the bad handwriting. Now, there are extra. Extra is the additional data which you want to pass. Action is the action you want to take on the other one, and we will see the example of each one of them. And data is the data which is coupled with this. So, either you send these two together or you send these two together. So, generally the concept is that either you when intent is created, either you have these two or these two, but you can always have all of this in the intent object. So, depending on what is the use case, sometime intent object is created with component name and extra, sometime intent object created with action and data. Generally, this kind of intent object like this are called implicit intent, and these are generally are explicit intent. Explicit because you are explicitly telling that which component you are sending this intent object. Okay. Now, let us see one example here. So, how do we see one example? So, first example is that from one activity I want to launch another activity. So, what I am planning to do here is I will first create intent object, then I am putting extra like this key value, and then I will say start activity. So, what it will do is that it will run this activity hello world.class, and this is called explicit intent. This is called explicit intent. Why we call it explicit intent? Because here the name of the component is already given, this one. Now, here we call it, these two are example of implicit intent, and we will see this explicit and implicit even further, but before that let us see that how it works. Now, if I want to create a website, launch a website from my activity, create intent object, here what I am doing is that this is called action. Okay. This is called data. Now, what is the difference between this data and this? This also looks like a data, but we call it extra. The difference between this and this kind of a data is that this data is explicitly for to take this action. So, if this data is combined with this action, I want that another activity should take some action called action view on this particular data. So, this action and data is kind of paired together and coupled. In this case, this data has nothing tied up with any action or how the second activity takes care of this data. Second activity may whatever want to do can do with this, there is no expected behavior or action. So, that is the difference between this kind of a data and this kind of a data. This is called extra, this is called data, and this is called action. And then when you say start activity intent, what happens is that Android goes and looks for an activity which is registered to listen to this intent and then launch that intent. Now, come back to this dial a number. So, again dial a number. In this one the action is this one, action dial, and this is your data. So, what it means is that you are saying that please start an activity which will take care of this action on this data. So again the action and data is paired, and then that activity launches and takes that action. So that is pretty much about how the different kinds of intent can be started and can be utilized for various purposes. Now some of this one will see it in Eclipse as well, so just hang on to this. But before that, let me just explain you the Java API, Android API for creating intent object. Now Android provides various APIs, or will use here the constructor to create intent object. So either you can create an intent object like empty intent, or you can copy from one intent object another intent object like this, copy constructor. These are the public constructor. These are the constructors which you will use to create intent object in Android. Or you can create an intent with a given action, which is this one. So this is another constructor, action with a URI, which is nothing but the data for this. So this is basically the case where you want action plus data and action. So this is, if you want to create an intent object like action and data, then this is the what you will use. In fact, if you go back the previous one, this is we have used in the past previous session, that only. Here it is context and class. This is called explicit intent mechanism. This is basically used in the implicit case. This is used for implicit, and this is used for explicit intent. Explicit means you are directly telling that please go to this class, this intent. Here you are telling I want some activity to take action on this data. Android has a responsibility to figure out which activity to launch. Sometimes you can do all of them. You want to use all of them and to create. And if you are using all of them, it pretty much becomes a explicit intent, where you are saying that I want this activity to take this action on this data. So you are not letting Android figure out that this action will be taken by this data or someone. You are telling yourself that I want this particular activity to take this action on this data. Now as I have been explaining, there are two types of intent called explicit intent and implicit intent. Explicit intents designate the target component by its name, the component name field. Implicit intents, they do not name a target, the field for the component name is blank, but use action name for this purpose. So what they do is that they will say I want to take this action, and let Android figure out if there is any activity which is ready to handle this action. And how does activity handle this action? Activity register themselves to this action, so that Android will know, okay, this activity is registered for this action, another activity is registered for another action, and that way. Now here is one example where what happens is that it is a combination of both explicit and implicit intent. In the whole this example, we will see that we will start with some explicit intent, some implicit intent, and all that. So there is a root activity. He first makes a request for a picture using an implicit intent, and then Android figures out which activity to launch for this request for camera. He figures out, oh, there is an activity called camera, so let us launch that. He launches camera activity takes the picture and returns it back. So this was implicit intent. Now sometime you want explicit intent. So what root activity is saying, I am going to launch another activity called map plotter activity, but that I will do with explicit intent. So he gives the picture to explicit intent, and inside that he puts the name of this activity, and he say launch. So it get directly launched, and it acquires the picture from this intent object itself, and then it plots the picture. Okay. So this is a flow for how the implicit and explicit intent happen step by step. Now, once the intent has been created, the other important thing is called intent filter. Now, how do you know that particular intent, particular activity will be triggered for a particular action? The way it works is that you can register a activity. Let us assume that you want to register the activity called hello world. So, when you register hello world activity, you can put it in the action like this, in a intent filter. Now, what it means is that I want to have a action called org.codeandroid.myintents.test registered with this activity. What does it mean? What it means is that if Android will look for an activity who can handle this action, then this activity will be used. So, it is like a register and subscribe. So, hello world has registered itself that I will listen for action called org.codeandroid.myintents.test. So, whenever somebody will fire that action, this activity can get triggered. So, this is the way you register your activity for a action, and that you put it inside intent filter, and you have to give some category name as well. Now, if I do like this, think about I am doing like this, what will happen? The moment I will do like this, this will launch this activity. Why it will launch this activity? See, here I am not putting any name of the activity. Did I say here hello world? No. I am just giving the name of the action. But how does this just naming the action will trigger this activity? The naming the action will trigger this activity because Android will try to find out, is there any activity who is listening for this action? Now, since I have already defined this activity listening for this activity get picked up by Android, and Android launches this activity on its own. So, this searching for the activity based on action is called intent resolution, and that Android framework does it for you automatically. Okay? You have to just make sure that you register the right action for an activity and you fire a right action to trigger that activity. And then when you say start activity intent, Android will go and launch this hello world. So, that was about intent action and intent filter. Now, little bit more about intent filters, little minor things about little bit more detailed thing I would say about intent filters. So, here is few things, additional thing about intent filters. Intent filters are used to inform the system which implicit intents they can handle. Activities, services and broadcast receiver can have one or more intent filters. Okay? So, their intent filters, a particular activity may have one or more intent filters. What it means is that I can create an activity which is listening on 3 different actions, or I can create an activity which is listening on 10 different actions. So, what it means is that if any of those 10 actions are triggered, that activity gets launched. But here is one trick problem. What happens if there are 3 different activities listening for the same action? Then what happens? Will all 3 start? Will none of them start? Will one of them randomly will start? What happens if there are 3 activities listening for the same action? Well, what happens is that whenever that scenario happens, Android will give you a pop-up menu and it will ask you, hey, the intent you have triggered is creating a situation where I can launch any of these 3 activities. Which one you want to start? And you have to select a particular activity, and that activity it will start. So, that is the way Android works. Okay? So, let us a little bit more about this. Each filter describes a capability of the component, a set of intents that the component is willing to receive. A set of intents or action, basically the action that component is willing to receive. An explicit intent is always delivered to its target, no matter what it contains. The filter is not consulted. So, if the intent is explicit to a particular, let us assume activity A wants to send explicit intent to activity B. Now, if activity B has also some filters defined, but since intent is explicit, that filter is of no use. Filter is only used for implicit intent. Explicit intent, there is no point. I am saying go there, so it will go there. Implicit intent, I am just saying take this action, where to go, Android will figure out. So, everybody is clear that filter is used for implicit intent resolution, not for explicit intent. Now, intent filters are used to register activities, services, broadcast receiver. You can put it, intent filters can be inside the for activities, for services and broadcast receiver. And most of the time intent filters are declared in Android manifest.xml file. So, you can put it manually in the code as well. While developing the application, there are Java API to register the filter through the code, but most of the time it is done through Android manifest.xml file. So, you can create your own intent filter the way you want it. And that pretty much completes the intent filter, the basic concept. Now, what we will see is that we will see a hands-on example and we will create a intent object and we will see how to develop a code in Eclipse using the intent and intent filter concepts, and we will see the code in Eclipse. So, next session will be hands-on coding in about intent object.